Hello everyone, it is Walt here today, and I'm doing a little bit of a kind of uncharacteristic kind of video for me, but I'm shooting one a little bit about Brexit today, as Brexit has now officially kind of passed through Parliament over in the UK. I'm in the US, but anyway, just wanted to talk about it a little bit since I have a lot of friends in the UK and I've got friends on both sides of kind of the issues. I know some people who are really hardcore on, behind Johnson and have been pushing Brexit and wanting it to happen for a long time. And I got a lot of friends there also more on the, younger and liberal kind of side pushing like, no, we want to stay in the EU. And so I kind of wanted to talk about what does this mean for everybody from my take on it. And I don't want to talk about politics on this channel. I don't want this to be suddenly an outrage like, oh no, so I'm super right wing or I'm super left wing, and then scare off half the people. Because you know what, at the end of the day, we're all just people. We're not these political parties. We're not, so different and split between these two things. Okay, everybody is somewhere in the middle of these things. Nobody is entirely masculine, nobody's entirely feminine, nobody's entirely right, nobody's entirely left. Just let's all realize we're all just people here. And I just wanted to talk through a little bit about Brexit, just about what this could mean for the UK. That could be good, that could be bad, and kind of just give a little bit of my take on it, because I think that some of these things that happen in the world are things that we should take note of and pay attention to, and I'm going to try to leave politics aside on it. So Brexit, what do we know about it? Well, I am no expert, I am no great political analyst or, somebody who's been doing more than just trying to follow the trends of the pound, because as a trader, I need to kind of follow that because the GU is like my favorite pair overall. And so then it's like, okay, well, what does this mean for the future of the UK, for the economy, that kind of stuff? And as somebody who's taken a lot of economic classes, just kind of my personal takes on it. Well, look at Brexit as a little bit twofold, okay? So with the outrush of Syrian refugees primarily, you had the EU get flooded by a lot of applicants. And it's good to take on immigrants, but you also need to be able to have a balancing act, okay? You want to be able to have people immigrate to your country, or else your economy becomes very much like Japan's. And Japan had a really thriving economy back in the 1900s towards the end there, as they were a developing country. But as they got to be now, I want to say like the third or fourth kind of largest GDP in the world, you have the problem here that you're running into just this issue that when you don't have immigrants and you have an aging population, you have a problem, as people are having less kids and paying more attention to those kids and having a higher middle class kind of way of life, you get less people. And so if you want to provide for your social safety net for the older people, the social security kind of things, then you need people who are going to be working and paying into that system unless you've invested what they've paid in before. But governments don't really tend to do that. They just tend to spend the money and then wait for future people to come in. It's kind of like a Ponzi scheme, except that they're not going to suddenly bail on paying these kind of things. So really it's a case where you need new people coming in to pay into the system. So you do need immigrants overall, okay? Immigrants are hardworking people. They want to come to a country and make a new life, and they will work really hard, and they're good people as a whole. Okay, that's just kind of how immigrants are usually, agree with me or disagree with me. That's just kind of like the economic perspective of it. So with Brexit, I mean, you had a problem with too many immigrants flooding into the EU, Britain being demanded to take a number of immigrants, and you had, this referendum come up and people being scared of, okay, we have these problems with the EU, we don't like having to buy specific things from the EU in certain ways, and, the immigrant flood's a little too much, and so Britain pulls out of the EU, or at least they say they're going to, okay, this referendum went through, and suddenly it's up to everybody to decide how are we getting out of the EU. So they made the decision, and finally, today they've decided, okay, we're actually going to get out of the EU. It's going to take about 11 months to actually make the transition. Till then, we're basically in it, but by that point, we're going to transition out of the EU. So what does this mean for the future of the EU? What does this mean for the future of the UK? Well, one thing is that a lot of international finance in the UK is done through the EU. So the EU has put in a lot of, different, some of their major banks and things like that have given a lot of the UK a lot of power and leverage, have been put in the UK because the UK has a lot of good banking kind of things that make it a little superior to putting your stuff just in the EU. So, I mean, the UK overall can be a little more conservative to some degree. You can argue against that or not, but some of their economic policies are a little bit better for your banking sector. Anyway, when you're pulling this out, this means the international deals like that of just being able to put your companies there suddenly become a little harder. If the UK wants to keep some of the big banks that have come from the EU and a lot of their funding there, then that's a good thing because you really need to keep that financing in place. Otherwise, the UK is a world power for, trade and for, the financial sector is a little bit threatened. US is always going to be a huge provider of that kind of financial stuff, so that'll always be the case, and they may just transition back to Europe, but it would be bad if a lot of the banking sector is lost there. You also have an economic toll that's going to be taken on the UK just when you pull out of the EU. Suddenly, a lot of your trade deals have gone through, and a lot of this is actually very beneficial. So there is a trade discrepancy between what the UK sold to Europe and what Europe sold to the UK. But regardless of that, your economy is about to take a hit when this happens, okay? Being independent does not work if you're already a developed country, okay? You need worldwide trade, trading your services primarily, because about 80% of people work in the service sector. You need to be able to trade your services with other people's services and to buy products with your money in exchange for other people's stuff. So the better connections you can have, the better, basically. And at the end of this with Brexit, a lot of people were thinking this is kind of just a mess because you know what? It kind of was, because when you're pulling out of this kind of big trade deal, being pulled out of the European Union, I mean, the EU has some problems with it, I'll give you that. But at the same time, if you're not linked to their currency, there's not really a good reason to get out of it because you can just negotiate. If you don't want to take that many immigrants, just say, I don't want to take that many immigrants. And I think that that's what everybody was going to do, except for the fact that, this just kind of happened. They put forward this referendum, nobody really thought it was going to pass, and then a bunch of people jumped on board with it because they wanted some change, and maybe those people changed their minds later on. Some of them certainly did not, but this is kind of where it ended up. So is this a problem? What does this mean? Well, the UK will probably take a slight hit economically because of this, and it is a strike for, it's kind of a strike against immigrants. It's also kind of a strike against, good kind of deals as well. But at the same time, this is no biggie. I mean, the US broke away from the UK. That was clearly a victory for the US. I can always go back to 1776 on the fact that this eventually worked out. But just like when it was there is the Articles of Confederation part of the US kind of did kill its economy for quite a number of years. I mean, between 1776, the battle, of course, went into the 1780s with Britain. But, the fact that the Constitution wasn't ratified until 1789 tells you that the Articles of Confederation lasted a while here and that they were kind of a failing attempt. Now, Britain is a developed nation. The US was not at all developed back then, so Britain's not about to go through some crazy constitutional crisis like the US did with Shays' Rebellion. But regardless of that, this is still a period where you're probably going to take a slight economic hit on the fact that you can't be able to trade, as well with Europe and to have that kind of connections. It'll also mean that people are going to have, a little more capital outflow as people want to pull some of their capital. There's going to be some capital outflows already from European businesses moving back to Europe without the ability to just, be in the UK. There's going to be some citizens who are UK citizens but want to live in Europe. There's going to be some changes there. Of course, there's the whole debate about what about, Irish stuff coming into play, Northern Ireland versus Ireland. There's a lot of things you really need to factor into kind of what this means overall, but I would say it's going to be a slight hit for the UK in the short run, but in the long run, they're probably just going to be just fine as long as they play it well with their financial sector and their business interests. Because if you suddenly have all those businesses pulling out, you have a real problem when this goes forward, because suddenly now all your financing is just flowed out of your country and your economy is not as powerful. So could mean a temporary hit, but if you handle it right, it probably won't be too big a deal. Establish good trade routes anyway and good trade deals, and they might just be fine. As for the EU, this is also not really good news for the EU because I don't want to say anything too bad about the EU here, but a lot of people have had their doubts about it. And with Britain pulling out, you'll realize the fact that there are some countries whose economies are not as good as others. I mean, particularly Spain has had some issues, but they're getting their act kind of together. You've got issues with the Italian economy, and of course Greece has had an issue for quite a while. And the thing about this is, I'm not saying it's their fault or anything. I'm just saying that when you have a centralized currency and no good, kind of no good federal government equivalent, basically, when all the states just do what they want with their own monetary policy, suddenly you run into some issues with the fact that some are going to say, okay, we need to, devalue our currency, versus others are going to be like, no, our currency is strong. And that just really happens because some countries, like Germany, for example, are pulling some of these other smaller countries who are just not being able to pull their weight. And it's not the fault of the smaller countries necessarily. It just means that sometimes, like if, you went back to, say, if you go back to like the German mark or whatever, kind of currency, then you're looking at something where Germany would be a lot stronger if they weren't pulling the weight of these other countries. But you have the benefit of being able to trade between these ones and, of course, having the ability to travel across Europe without difficulty. So there are a lot of good things about the EU, and not having to trade your currency every time you go across borders makes it a lot easier for travel, makes it a lot easier for all these kind of things. And the European Union really is a strong kind of idea. It's just if you don't have a good monetary policy that's centralized, if you don't have like a good Federal Reserve equivalent, then you're going to have countries that are going to kind of wreck it for everybody else. And that's somewhat of what we've seen. The euro has declined in value over time. That's might have just been because it was overvalued when it was initially started with the EU. People have always had their doubts about the EU, but I would say it's a case where the EU needs to get stronger as a central government, establish kind of a central government to make a lot of the rules. Very basic rules. You don't need something super complex, but just some good monetary policy to keep it from having certain, different countries just drag down the economies of other ones. But, that happens. Also, the negative bond rate, seriously, guys, just throw off that kind of crap. You can't put your bond rates at negative numbers just to take advantage of, some of those kind of things. I mean, it's just not really a good economic policy. It's below the zero bound. Ain't nobody ever going to want to buy your bonds. I mean, some pension funds have to, but, just come on, cut that crap. Anyway, but yeah, that's about what I have to say on Brexit. Brexit could be bad for the UK. There are some who say it's going to be good. Maybe it'll be good in the long run if Britain just, feels like they need to have their independence and whatnot. A lot of people didn't want this to happen, but it's going to happen, so, this is what's happening, deal with it kind of idea. So we'll see how it plays out in the long run. I would say short run, the British economy is going to take a little bit of a hit when this actually happens, but if they handle it right, it will go well. If they don't handle it right, you could easily have a bigger hit to the downside, so watch out for that. We'll see how this plays out overall, but I would say it's also a loss for Europe because, of course, nobody really wanted this super strong in Europe. I mean, the UK was a big puller for Europe, and with the UK pulling out of the European Union, that's one of your strongest players leaving. Regardless of how much of a jerk they were, you probably still want your strong players with you. So too bad for the EU, too bad for the UK, but we'll see how this works out in the long run, if they ever get back together again, or if they're just gonna, stay separate for the foreseeable future. But we'll see how it goes out, we'll see what kind of trade deals they set up, and I'd say it's just a time to watch it and to realize that sometimes it's not the best to go along with crazy policies just because you want kind of change, you want something different. I mean, I understand the independence move, but overall, if the economy is going to get hurt by it, it's kind of questionable why you do it. But there's also a lot of strong evidence saying that there were issues with the European Union and these trade deals and a lot of stuff. So I can see both sides of the issue. And I can see why Europe both is saying, okay, already get out of here, and of course saying, no, we kind of want you to stay. It's just kind of how it's played out. But yeah, it's kind of what I have to say about Brexit. We'll see how it plays out. I'm sure if everybody handles it right, it'll work in the long run, but we will see. So yeah, anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I will see you guys next time with our next video, so stay tuned. I'll see you then.